Hello, everyone. If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
My biggest lie. What if I told you the biggest lie I ever told wasn't to a stranger, it was to the man I love most? Every morning, I smiled at my husband, packed lunches for our children, and said, everything is fine. But it wasn't. For months, I carried a secret that grew heavier every single day. I believed I was protecting my family. Instead, I was quietly risking everything we had built together. Before this story ends, you'll understand why one simple sentence almost changed my marriage forever and why telling the truth became the hardest thing I have ever done. If you saw our family from the outside, you would probably think we had a happy, ordinary life. We lived in a quiet neighborhood in the United States where children rode their bikes after school and neighbors waved every evening while walking their dogs. Every Saturday morning, my husband made pancakes. Every Sunday, we sat together watching old movies while our kids argued over which blanket belonged to whom. It wasn't a perfect life, but it felt warm, familiar, and real. The strange thing about secrets is that they don't usually begin with something big. Mine started with one small decision. One sentence. One lie. At the time, it seemed harmless. I even convinced myself it was the Kinder choice. I'll tell him later, I whispered to myself. Later became tomorrow. Tomorrow became next week. Before I realized it, months had passed. The lie wasn't growing because I kept adding new stories. It was growing because I kept saying nothing. Silence can become its own kind of lie. Every evening, my husband would ask me the same question. How was your day? I always smiled. It was good. The answer came naturally. Too naturally. After repeating it enough times, I almost believed it myself. Almost. One quiet afternoon, while folding laundry in the living room, I looked across the room at our family photo hanging above the fireplace. My husband was smiling with one arm around me. Our children were laughing because someone had told a silly joke just before the camera clicked. Looking at that picture should have made me feel grateful. Instead, I felt guilty. Because the woman smiling in that photograph wasn't carrying the weight I was carrying now. Psychologists often explain that hiding a secret creates what is known as a cognitive burden. The brain constantly works to remember what should and shouldn't be said. That's why people carrying secrets often feel mentally exhausted, even when nothing dramatic is happening. I didn't know the scientific term back then. I only knew I was tired. Very tired. Not because of work. Not because of parenting. Because pretending everything was normal takes more energy than telling the truth. That evening, after dinner, I sat at the kitchen table with the small notebook I use for practicing English. Reading short, simple sentences has always helped me slow down my thoughts. I wrote one sentence. I need to tell the truth. I read it slowly. Again. And again. The words were easy to pronounce. Living them felt impossible. Sometimes learning English reminds me of life itself. Simple sentences are often the hardest ones to say. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I need help. I told a lie. Each sentence contains only a few words, yet they can completely change a person's life. My husband walked into the kitchen carrying 2 cups of tea. He placed one beside me. What are you reading today? He asked with a smile. I quickly closed the notebook. Oh, just practicing. He nodded without asking another question. That small moment hurt more than I expected. He trusted me completely. And I wasn't giving him the same honesty in return. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I quietly opened a drawer in my bedroom. Hidden beneath several folded sweaters was a plain white envelope. No name, no address. Just an envelope. Inside it was the reason my life had become divided into 2 versions. The woman everyone believed I was, and the woman I really was. I held the envelope in my hands for several minutes. Tonight could be the night. Tonight I could finally tell my husband everything. I even walked halfway down the hallway toward our bedroom. Then I stopped. Fear won again. I quietly placed the envelope back into the drawer. The next morning began like every other morning. Breakfast, coffee, school backpacks, goodbye hugs. Nothing seemed unusual. Until my husband looked at me just before leaving for work. He smiled gently. Then he said something that made my heart almost stop. I found something yesterday. My hands froze around my coffee cup. He looked directly into my eyes. I think we need to talk tonight. In that instant, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Someone had found the secret I thought I had hidden perfectly. And by sunset, my biggest lie might no longer belong only to me. One small lie became many. Have you ever noticed how the smallest lie can become a prison without walls? I thought I was protecting the people I loved. Instead, every sunrise brought a new fear, and every ordinary conversation felt like a test I wasn't prepared to take. When my husband said, "I think we need to talk tonight," my heart didn't just skip a beat. It felt like the truth had already walked through the front door before I did. What happened over the next few hours forced me to question whether silence can hurt more than honesty. After my husband left for work, I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the coffee cup still sitting on the counter. His words echoed inside my mind. I found something yesterday. What had he found? The white envelope? One of the papers inside? Or something else I hadn't even considered? The uncertainty was almost unbearable. I wanted to call him immediately. I wanted to ask him what he meant. Instead, I did nothing. Fear has an unusual habit. It convinces you that waiting somehow feels safer than knowing. The rest of the morning passed in slow motion. I folded laundry twice because I couldn't remember whether I had already finished. I started reading a recipe but forgot every ingredient before reaching the second paragraph. Even the sound of the washing machine seemed unusually loud. My mind wasn't inside my house anymore. It was trapped inside one question. Does he know? That afternoon, my daughter came home from school carrying a drawing she had made in art class. "Mom," she said proudly, "our teacher asked us to draw the most honest person we know." I smiled. "Who did you draw?" She grinned. "You." The room suddenly felt very quiet. I looked at the picture. It showed our family holding hands beneath a bright blue sky. Above us, she had carefully written one sentence in colorful letters. "My mom always tells the truth." I hugged her tightly. Perhaps too tightly. She laughed. "Mom, I can't breathe." I laughed too. But inside, something broke. Children often see us through eyes filled with trust. That's exactly why disappointing them feels heavier than disappointing ourselves. Psychologists explain that guilt becomes strongest when our actions conflict with the person we believe we are. It's called cognitive dissonance. We don't suffer only because we made a mistake. We suffer because the mistake no longer matches the identity we want to have. That described me perfectly. I wasn't only hiding the truth. I was slowly becoming someone I didn't recognize. Later that afternoon, I opened my English notebook again. Writing simple sentences had quietly become my way of calming anxious thoughts. I wrote, "A lie grows in silence." Then underneath it, "The truth feels scary." I repeated both sentences aloud. Slowly. Clearly. Each word sounded simple. Yet every sentence seemed to describe my life. Around 5 o'clock, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my husband. "Running a little late. We'll talk after dinner." Nothing more. No smile. No heart emoji. No explanation. Just 12 ordinary words. Yet I read them at least 10 times. Every version sounded different inside my head. Maybe he was angry. Maybe he was disappointed. Maybe he was giving me one last chance to confess before he confronted me himself. By the time he came home, I had imagined dozens of conversations. In some, he forgave me. In others, he packed his suitcase. Fear is incredibly creative. It writes endings before the story reaches the middle. Dinner felt strangely normal. Our son talked about basketball practice. Our daughter laughed because the family dog had stolen one of her socks again. My husband smiled, asked questions, passed the salad. If someone had watched us through the window, they would have seen a perfectly happy American family sharing an ordinary meal. Only I knew my hands were trembling beneath the table. Finally, after the children went upstairs to finish their homework, my husband looked at me. It's time. My heart pounded. He slowly reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and placed it gently on the kitchen table. I think this belongs to you. I looked down. The paper wasn't from the white envelope. I had never seen it before. My name was written across the front, in my own handwriting. Suddenly, I remembered exactly where it had come from. And in that terrifying instant, I realized my biggest lie had started much earlier than I had been willing to admit. When the truth knocked. Have you ever recognized your own handwriting and instantly wished you hadn't? The folded paper lying on our kitchen table wasn't just another forgotten note. It was proof that my biggest lie hadn't started a few weeks earlier. It had started the day I convinced myself that hiding the truth was an act of love. The moment I saw my own writing, I realized something terrifying. My husband wasn't guessing anymore. He was standing at the edge of the truth, and I had no idea how much he already knew. For several seconds, I couldn't even touch the paper. My husband didn't rush me. He simply sat across from me, quietly watching my face. I found it while cleaning the garage, he said gently. It slipped out of one of the storage boxes. My stomach tightened. I slowly unfolded it. The paper was slightly wrinkled, but every word was still clear. It wasn't a letter. It was a list. A list I had written months earlier during one of the most emotional days of my life. At the top, in large letters, I had written, "Things I can never tell anyone." My heart sank. Below the title were several sentences I barely remembered writing. Each one captured a fear I had been carrying alone. I'm afraid he'll be disappointed in me. I'm afraid the children will see me differently. Maybe it's better if no one knows. I stared at the page. Those words no longer felt like ink. They felt like a mirror. My husband looked at me carefully. I didn't read all of it, he said. I stopped after the first few lines. I looked up in surprise. You stopped. He nodded. It didn't feel right. That answer caught me completely off guard. He had the chance to learn every secret. Instead, he chose to protect my privacy. The guilt became almost unbearable. Because while I had been hiding the truth from him, he had been respecting a boundary I hadn't even asked him to respect. Silence filled the kitchen. Not an angry silence. A fragile one. The kind where both people know that the next sentence could change everything. I've noticed something for a while, my husband finally admitted. You haven't really been yourself. I lowered my eyes. You smile. He paused. You laugh with the kids. Another pause. But sometimes I catch you looking worried when you think nobody is watching. I felt tears beginning to form. How had he noticed so much? While I believed I was hiding everything. Researchers often explain that the people closest to us recognize emotional changes long before they understand the reasons behind them. A forced smile may fool strangers, but it rarely fools someone who shares everyday life with us. That truth suddenly became painfully obvious. I kept waiting, he continued. I thought that when you were ready, you'd tell me. Those words hurt more than any accusation could have. He hadn't been demanding answers. He had been patiently waiting for honesty. I quietly reached for my English notebook. Writing had become my safe place whenever emotions became too loud. I slowly wrote. He already knew I was hurting. Then underneath it, love notices small changes. Reading those simple sentences aloud made my voice tremble. Sometimes the shortest English sentences carry the biggest emotions. My husband smiled softly. I like hearing you practice. I almost laughed. Even now, he was encouraging me, not questioning me, not judging me, just encouraging me. For a brief moment, I considered telling him everything. Right there. No more waiting. No more hiding. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Fear won again. Instead, I whispered something completely different. I'm just tired. The moment those words left my mouth, I knew I had just told another lie. It wasn't as big as the first one, but somehow it felt heavier. Because this time, I watched disappointment quietly pass across my husband's face. Not anger, not suspicion, just sadness. He slowly stood up. I hope one day you'll trust me enough to tell me what's really going on. Then he walked toward the hallway. Halfway there, he stopped. Without turning around, he said something that froze me completely. Oh, there's one more thing. My heartbeat instantly accelerated. This afternoon. He paused. Someone came to the house asking for you. I stared at him. They said they had important documents. Another pause. About something you never told me. At that exact moment, the doorbell rang. Once. Then again. My husband looked toward the front door. Then back at me. Is that the person? I couldn't breathe. Because deep inside, I already knew exactly who was standing on the other side. I almost told the truth. What would you do if the person standing outside your front door had the power to expose the one secret you've hidden from everyone you love? My heart pounded so hard I could barely hear the second ring of the doorbell. I wanted to disappear. I wanted time to stop. Most of all, I wanted one more chance to tell the truth before someone else told it for me. But life rarely waits until we're ready, and that evening, I realized that every lie has a moment when it quietly stops belonging to us. The doorbell rang a third time. Neither of us moved. My husband looked at me, not with anger, but with quiet concern. You don't have to answer if you don't want to, he said. His kindness made everything worse. Because the more patient he became, the more ashamed I felt. Finally, I stood up. My legs felt strangely heavy as I walked toward the front door. Every step sounded louder than the last. When I opened it, a woman in a navy blue jacket smiled politely. Good evening, she said. I'm sorry to stop by again. Again? So she had already been here earlier. She held a large envelope with my name printed across the front. I couldn't reach you by phone, she explained. I was asked to deliver these documents personally. I quickly accepted the envelope before she could say another word. Thank you, I replied, forcing a smile. She nodded kindly and walked back to her car. I closed the door slowly. Behind me, my husband remained silent. He wasn't trying to read the envelope. He wasn't asking questions. He simply waited. That silence became almost unbearable. Researchers often say that when people feel psychologically safe, they are more likely to admit mistakes. Safety doesn't erase fear, but it lowers the walls we build around ourselves. For the first time in months, I felt safe. And somehow, that made telling the truth even more possible. I placed the unopened envelope on the kitchen table. My husband looked at it, then at me. Whatever it is, he said quietly, we'll figure it out. Those 5 words nearly broke me. We'll figure it out. Not you'll figure it out. Not explain yourself. Not why did you lie. Just, we'll. I walked to the window, staring out at the quiet American street. A family across the road was unloading groceries. A teenager rode past on a skateboard. Somewhere nearby, someone laughed. The world continued exactly as it always had. Yet inside our home, everything felt suspended between fear and honesty. I opened my English notebook, almost automatically. Writing had become the one habit that slowed my racing thoughts. This time I wrote, "Truth needs courage." Then another sentence, "Fear loves waiting." I whispered both lines aloud. Slowly. Clearly. My husband smiled faintly. "I like that one." "So do I admitted. But living it is harder than reading it." He nodded. "I know." That answer surprised me. "You know?" He looked down for a moment. "I've had things I was afraid to say too." For the first time that evening, I looked directly into his eyes. Maybe I wasn't the only person carrying invisible weight. Maybe marriage wasn't about one perfect partner saving another. Maybe it was simply two imperfect people learning when to stop hiding. I reached for the envelope. My fingers trembled. I could feel my heartbeat in my hands. This was it. The moment I had imagined for months. I slowly opened the seal. Inside were several official papers, a cover letter, and one familiar document that instantly made my stomach drop. My husband noticed the expression on my face. "What is it?" I took a deep breath. The word refused to continue. I wanted to say everything. I wanted to explain why I had hidden it. Why I thought I was protecting our family. Why every lie had started with good intentions. Instead, tears came first. Real tears. The kind you can no longer hide. My husband quietly walked over and sat beside me. He didn't touch the papers. He didn't interrupt. He simply placed his hand over mine. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore." That sentence shattered every wall I had built. I finally gathered enough courage to speak. "I've been lying to you." He nodded gently. "I know." I froze. "You know?" He looked at the documents. Then back at me. "I don't know the whole story." A long pause followed. "But I think I already know what this is about." My heart nearly stopped. How could he possibly know? Before I could ask another question, he slowly reached into the drawer beside the kitchen table. He pulled out something I had never seen before. It was another envelope. Smaller. Older. And my name was written on it, in his handwriting. "I was waiting," he whispered. "Waiting until you were ready." I stared at the envelope, completely speechless. Because if what I suspected was true, my husband had been keeping a secret of his own. The secret could no longer hide. What would you feel if the person you had been lying to quietly revealed that they had been carrying a secret too? My hands were still shaking as I stared at the old envelope with my name written in my husband's handwriting. For months, I believed I was the only one hiding something inside our marriage. I was wrong. In that single moment, I realized we had both been protecting each other in completely different ways, and neither of us understood the damage silence was causing. I looked at the envelope for several long seconds. "I've never seen this before," I whispered. My husband nodded. "I know. Why didn't you give it to me?" He gave a small, tired smile. "For the same reason you never gave me yours." His answer landed softly. But it hit my heart like a storm. Fear. We had both been waiting for the perfect moment. The problem was, perfect moments almost never arrive. I slowly picked up his envelope. It felt surprisingly light. Inside was only one folded letter. Nothing more. No legal papers. No hidden photographs. No dramatic evidence. Just a letter. "I wrote it almost 6 months ago," he said quietly. "I planned to give it to you many times." "What stopped you?" He looked toward the family room where our children were laughing upstairs. I thought our family needed peace more than difficult conversations. His words sounded painfully familiar. That had been my excuse too. Sometimes two people can make the same mistake while believing they're protecting each other. Relationship experts often explain that avoiding uncomfortable conversations may reduce conflict today, but it often increases emotional distance tomorrow. Looking back, that described us perfectly. We weren't fighting. We were drifting. I unfolded the letter carefully. The first sentence immediately filled my eyes with tears. If you're reading this, it means we've finally stopped pretending everything is okay. I kept reading. He wrote about noticing how anxious I had become. He wrote about hearing me cry quietly one night after everyone else was asleep. He wrote that he wanted to ask questions every single day. But he was afraid pushing too hard would make me retreat even further. One sentence stayed with me longer than all the others. I don't need a perfect wife. I just need the real you. I couldn't hold back my tears anymore. For months, I had convinced myself that telling the truth would disappoint him. Meanwhile, he had only wanted honesty. Nothing else. I closed the letter and finally looked at the unopened documents that had arrived earlier that evening. The papers inside represented the secret I had hidden for months. A financial mistake. Not because I had been irresponsible. Not because I had betrayed my family. Months earlier, I had secretly used a large portion of my personal savings to help my younger sister through a serious emergency. She begged me not to tell anyone because she was ashamed and promised she would repay everything within a few weeks. She never intended to hurt me. Life simply became more complicated than either of us expected. When the repayment kept getting delayed, I became afraid. Afraid my husband would think I didn't trust him. Afraid he would wonder why I made such an important decision alone. So instead of telling the truth, I kept hiding it. 1 week became 1 month. 1 month became several. The secret became heavier with every passing day. I quietly opened my English notebook once again. My hands were steadier now. I wrote, "Honesty feels lighter." Then underneath it, "Secrets become heavier." I smiled sadly. Simple English. Powerful lesson. My husband looked over my shoulder. "I like practicing with you." "So do I admitted. "It helps me slow down." He nodded. "Maybe that's exactly what we've needed. To slow down. To listen. To stop assuming. To start speaking." For the first time that evening, I finally slid the financial documents across the table toward him. "I want you to know everything." He didn't open them immediately. Instead, he looked directly into my eyes. "Thank you." Just those 2 words. Not anger. Not disappointment. Gratitude. Because I had finally trusted him enough to stop hiding. I explained everything. Every decision. Every mistake. Every fear. Every sleepless night. When I finished, the room became completely silent. He carefully reviewed the documents. Occasionally nodding. Occasionally asking gentle questions. Never once raising his voice. When he finished reading, he quietly folded the papers. Then he said something I never expected. "I already solved part of this." I stared at him. "What do you mean?" Without answering immediately, he stood up and walked toward the small desk near our living room window. He unlocked the top drawer, reached inside, and removed a thin folder I had never seen before. He placed it on the table between us. Across the front, in bold letters, were 3 words that made my heart race all over again. Family Recovery Plan. I looked at him in complete disbelief. "When did you make this?" He smiled gently. "The day I realized you were hiding something." Then he opened the folder to the very first page. And what I saw there made me realize. My husband had been preparing not for the end of our marriage, but for a brand new beginning. The truth my husband already knew. What if this secret you spent months trying to hide wasn't actually a secret anymore? As my husband slowly opened the folder labeled Family Recovery Plan, I expected to see evidence proving how badly I had failed him. Instead, every page revealed something I never imagined. He hadn't been preparing to leave me. He had been quietly preparing to help me. At that moment, I realized my biggest lie hadn't broken our marriage yet, but the fear of telling the truth almost had. The first page wasn't a financial report. It wasn't a legal document. It wasn't even a budget. At the top of the page, in neat handwriting, was one simple sentence. Problems become smaller when two people carry them together. I couldn't stop staring at it. Below the sentence, my husband had written several practical ideas. Reduce unnecessary monthly expenses. Delay a planned vacation. Take on a few extra freelance projects. Review our savings together. Create a family emergency fund. None of the pages blamed me. None of them mentioned disappointment. Every page focused on one thing. Solutions. I looked at him in disbelief. You made all of this, without even knowing the full story? He smiled gently. I didn't need every detail. I only knew that something was making you suffer. His answer left me speechless. For months, I had been afraid he would judge me. Instead, he had been quietly preparing to stand beside me. Relationship counselors often explain that healthy couples focus less on assigning blame and more on solving problems together. The strongest marriages aren't built on never making mistakes. They're built on believing that mistakes don't have to become permanent walls. Sitting there at our kitchen table, I finally understood what that meant. I should have trusted you, I whispered. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I wish you had. There was no anger in his voice, only sadness. And somehow sadness was even harder to hear, because sadness meant we had both lost precious months that we could have spent helping each other. I slowly opened my English notebook. By now, it had become part diary, part language practice, and part emotional rescue. I carefully wrote, "Truth builds trust." Then underneath it, "Fear builds distance." I read both sentences aloud, slowly, one word at a time. My husband smiled. Your English keeps getting better. I laughed softly, maybe because my heart is finally slowing down. He laughed too. For the first time in months, the laughter felt natural. Not forced. Not borrowed. Real. We spent the next hour reviewing every document together. Every receipt. Every bank statement. Every decision. Instead of asking, "Why did you do this?" he kept asking, "What should we do next?" That single difference changed everything. One question looked backward. The other looked forward. When we finally finished, I expected the conversation to end. Instead, my husband surprised me again. I need to tell you something too. I looked at him carefully. You mean, another secret? He nodded. A smaller one. He took a slow breath. I've been meeting with a financial advisor for the last 2 months. I blinked. You have? I wanted professional advice before saying anything. I was genuinely surprised. You handled all of this by yourself? He shook his head. No. I was hoping one day we'd handle it together. Those words reminded me how differently our minds had been working. I hid because I feared losing his trust. He prepared because he believed we would eventually face the problem as a team. Outside, evening rain began tapping softly against the windows. The sound filled the quiet spaces between our sentences. Somehow it felt peaceful. For the first time in a very long time, our home no longer felt heavy. It felt honest. Just as we began putting the papers back into the folder, my phone vibrated on the table. The screen lit up. It was my younger sister. The same sister whose emergency had started this entire chain of secrets. She almost never called this late. I answered immediately. Before I could say hello, I heard her crying. Real panic filled her voice. "I am so sorry," she whispered. "They've made a terrible mistake." My husband immediately looked at me. I put the call on speaker. My sister struggled to breathe between her words. "The bank," she paused, "called me today." Another long silence. "They said someone has already paid everything." I frowned. "What are you talking about?" "The money. The debt. It's gone." I slowly turned toward my husband. His expression changed. Not to surprise. To quiet acceptance. As if he had known this moment would come. I whispered only one question. "Did you do this?" He looked down for several seconds. Then he quietly nodded. And what he said next made me realize. The biggest sacrifice in our marriage had never been mine. The hardest truth I ever told. What if the person you believed you had disappointed the most had actually been protecting you all along? When my husband quietly admitted that he had already paid my sister's debt, I felt the room spin around me. For months, I had lived with guilt, fear, and sleepless nights, convinced that my biggest lie would destroy our family. But nothing prepared me for what he confessed next. In that moment, I realized the truth wasn't just waiting to be spoken, it had been quietly waiting to forgive me. I couldn't say a single word. I simply stared at him. "You paid it?" He nodded. "Several weeks ago." My sister was still crying on the phone. "I wanted to tell you," she said. "He asked me not to. He said you needed time." I slowly ended the call. The kitchen became completely silent again. Not uncomfortable, just full of emotions that neither of us knew how to describe. I looked at my husband. "Why didn't you tell me?" He smiled softly. "Because I knew you." That answer confused me. "You knew I would eventually tell the truth." He paused before continuing. "But I also knew you needed to tell it because you chose honesty, not because you got caught." His words stayed with me. Researchers who study relationships often say that lasting trust isn't built by forcing confessions. It grows when people feel emotionally safe enough to be vulnerable on their own. Pressure may reveal facts, but patience often reveals the heart. My husband had understood that long before I did. I covered my face with both hands. "I'm so sorry." The words came out as a whisper. "I'm sorry I lied. I'm sorry I didn't trust you. I'm sorry I carried this alone." He reached across the table and gently held my hands. "I know." "No," I replied through tears. "You don't know everything." For months, I had rehearsed this conversation inside my mind. Hundreds of times. Every version ended differently. Some ended with anger. Some with silence. Some with goodbye. None of them looked like this. I finally took the deepest breath of my life. There was something else. His expression remained calm. I borrowed money from my own emergency savings because my sister was too embarrassed to ask anyone else for help. I thought she'd repay it within a few weeks. When she couldn't, I became afraid. So instead of asking for your help, I lied. Every sentence made my shoulders feel lighter. Not because the story became easier. Because it was finally true. He listened without interrupting. Without defending himself. Without judging me. When I finished, he quietly nodded. "Thank you." I blinked. "Thank you for trusting me now." Those words changed something inside me forever. My biggest confession didn't receive punishment. It received understanding. Later that evening, after the children had gone to bed, we sat together on the back porch. The summer air was cool, and the neighborhood was peaceful. Somewhere nearby, sprinklers quietly watered freshly cut grass. The ordinary sounds of an American evening suddenly felt comforting instead of distant. I opened my English notebook one more time. The pages had become a timeline of my emotions. I wrote slowly. Honesty brings peace. Then another sentence. Love listens before judging. I read both aloud, word by word. My husband smiled. I think those are your strongest English sentences yet. I laughed. Maybe because I finally believe them. For the first time in months, my heart felt quiet. Not because every problem had disappeared. We still needed to rebuild our savings. We still had difficult conversations ahead. Life wasn't magically perfect. But the biggest weight had finally disappeared. The weight of pretending. As we prepared to go back inside, my husband stopped at the porch door. Oh. He smiled. I almost forgot. What? I have something to show you tomorrow. I raised an eyebrow. What is it? If I tell you now. He laughed softly. It won't be a surprise. I smiled for the first time that day without forcing it. A good surprise? The best one. The next morning, he asked me to drive with him across town. We pulled into a quiet parking lot I had never visited before. It wasn't a restaurant. It wasn't a park. It wasn't a bank. Across the street stood a small brick building with a sign that instantly caught my attention. I looked at the words, then back at him. My eyes filled with tears, because I suddenly realized everything he had done over the past several months had been leading to this one unforgettable moment. The surprise I never saw coming. What if the place your husband secretly brought you to wasn't where your marriage ended, but where it quietly began again? As I stared at the small brick building across the street, I realized every fear I had carried for months had hidden one incredible truth from me. I thought this morning would be another difficult conversation about money, mistakes, and regret. Instead, it became the day I finally understood what my biggest lie had almost stolen from both of us and why my husband never stopped believing in the woman behind my fear. I looked through the windshield, trying to understand why we were there. The building wasn't fancy. It didn't have bright signs or large windows. Families quietly walked in and out, smiling as they greeted one another. Above the entrance, a simple sign read, Family Financial Wellness Center. I turned toward my husband. You brought me here? He nodded. I did. Why? He smiled gently. Because this isn't just about fixing money. It's about helping us never feel alone again. For a moment, I couldn't answer. Months ago, I believed asking for help meant admitting failure. Now I was beginning to understand something completely different. Sometimes asking for help is the strongest decision a family can make. We walked inside together. The waiting area felt warm and welcoming. A volunteer offered us coffee, and children colored quietly at a small table while their parents completed paperwork. Nobody looked embarrassed. Nobody looked ashamed. They looked hopeful. A counselor welcomed us into her office. She didn't begin by asking how much money we had. She asked something much more important. How are the two of you doing? That simple question surprised me. For the next hour, we talked openly. About stress. About communication. About fear. About the pressure so many families quietly carry without ever speaking about it. The counselor explained that financial stress is one of the most common reasons couples begin hiding things from each other, not because love disappears, but because shame often speaks louder than trust. I quietly nodded. That sentence described my life perfectly. She smiled kindly. The goal isn't to become a perfect family. The goal is to become an honest one. Those words stayed with me long after we left her office. Outside, the morning sun had finally broken through the clouds. Everything somehow looked brighter. Not because our problems had disappeared. Because we finally had a plan. As we walked toward the car, my husband reached for my hand. I've wanted to bring you here for weeks. What stopped you? I asked. I was waiting until you were ready. There it was again. Patience. Not pressure. The same patience that had quietly carried our marriage through its hardest season. On the drive home, I opened my English notebook. I smiled before writing. This time the words came easily. Honesty creates hope. Then I added another sentence. We solve problems together. I slowly read them aloud. The pronunciation felt smoother than ever before. Maybe because my mind wasn't crowded with fear anymore. Learning English through simple sentences suddenly felt very similar to rebuilding trust. You don't improve overnight. You improve one word. One conversation. One day at a time. That afternoon, we picked up the children from school and decided to spend the rest of the day together. We visited a small community park where families gathered for weekend picnics. Our son challenged his father to a basketball game, while our daughter insisted I help her feed the ducks by the pond. Watching them laugh reminded me why telling the truth had been worth every difficult moment. Peace isn't the absence of problems. It's the absence of pretending. Later that evening, while organizing papers at home, I noticed something tucked inside the folder my husband had prepared weeks earlier. It was a handwritten page I hadn't seen before. Across the top, he had written, "Dreams for our family." Curious, I began reading. Some dreams were simple. Take more walks together. Eat dinner without phones. Read more books. Travel to places we'd never seen. Then I reached the final dream. The handwriting became slightly larger. Help her achieve something she's quietly wanted for years. I frowned. I looked at him. What does this mean? He smiled but didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked over to the bookshelf, reached behind a row of family photo albums, and carefully placed a small wrapped box into my hands. I bought this months ago, he whispered. I was only waiting for the right moment. I slowly untied the ribbon, lifted the lid, and the moment I saw what was inside, I realized my husband had known one secret about me that I had never told anyone. We chose the truth together. What if the biggest surprise wasn't hidden inside the gift, but inside the person standing beside you? As I slowly lifted the lid of the small box, I expected something beautiful. I never expected something so deeply personal. The gift wasn't expensive. It wasn't luxurious. Yet it proved that while I had been hiding my biggest lie, my husband had quietly been paying attention to dreams I had never spoken aloud. At that moment, I realized love sometimes hears the words we never say. Inside the box was a brand new journal. Its cover was simple navy blue leather. Tucked beneath it was a set of beginner-friendly English novels, each written in slow, easy language. There was also a handwritten bookmark. I carefully unfolded it. It read, "For the woman who always wanted to tell stories, but never believed her own voice mattered." I looked at my husband with tears already filling my eyes. "How did you know?" He smiled. "I've known for years. I've seen you write little notes. I've watched you practice English after everyone else went to bed. I noticed the stories hidden between your vocabulary pages." I laughed through my tears. "I thought no one ever saw that." "I did," he answered. "I just waited until you believed it too." Those words reached places inside my heart that fear had occupied for months. All this time, I believed my husband would only see my mistakes. Instead, he had been quietly seeing my dreams. Psychologists often explain that healthy relationships grow stronger when partners support each other's personal growth, not just daily responsibilities. Feeling truly seen creates emotional security, and emotional security encourages honesty. Now I finally understood why. When someone accepts the real version of you, hiding becomes much harder. That evening, after dinner, I opened the journal for the very first time. The first page was blank. At the top, I slowly wrote, "My biggest lie." Then underneath it, another sentence. "The truth gave me my life back." I smiled. Not because writing erased the past. Because writing helped me understand it. My husband walked over carrying 2 cups of tea, just as he had done so many evenings before. Only this time, there were no secrets sitting between us. He looked at the journal. "So, is this your first story?" I nodded. "It is." "I hope you'll keep writing." "I think I will." Then I picked up my English notebook. It had become my quiet companion through every difficult chapter. I wrote one final practice sentence for the day. "Honesty changes everything." Then another. "Love grows with truth." I read both aloud. Slowly. Clearly. Our children wandered into the room just in time to hear me. Our daughter smiled proudly. "Mom, your English sounds better." I laughed. "Maybe my heart sounds better too." She hugged me tightly without completely understanding what I meant. Children don't always understand every detail, but they notice peace. Over the next several weeks, our home slowly found a new rhythm. Not because every challenge disappeared. Bills still arrived. Unexpected expenses still happened. Busy schedules still filled our calendar. But something had changed forever. Whenever one of us felt overwhelmed, we promised to say so. Whenever fear appeared, we talked before assumptions had a chance to grow. Every Friday evening became our family conversation night. Sometimes we talked about school. Sometimes work. Sometimes dreams. Sometimes worries. No topic became too small. No emotion became too embarrassing. Even our English practice became part of those evenings. We read one simple sentence together before dinner. The children loved correcting my pronunciation. My husband laughed every time they became tiny teachers. Those ordinary moments became some of my favorite memories. One rainy Sunday afternoon, while placing the journal back on the bookshelf, I noticed something tucked into the back cover. Another folded note. I smiled immediately. Apparently my husband wasn't finished surprising me. I unfolded it carefully. There was only one sentence. Turn to the last page. Curious, I flipped through the journal until I reached the end. The final page wasn't blank. There, in my husband's handwriting, were words that instantly brought tears to my eyes. One day, I hope this story helps someone else choose the truth before fear chooses for them. I closed the journal slowly, looked at him, and suddenly realized our story wasn't ending. It was only about to reach the chapter that neither of us had ever imagined. The truth set us free. What if the biggest lie of your life became the greatest gift you could ever give someone else? Months ago, I believed telling the truth would destroy my marriage, disappoint my children, and erase the life we had carefully built together. Today, as I look back, I realize something completely different. The lie was never protecting my family. The lie was protecting my fear. The truth didn't break us. It brought us back to each other, one honest conversation at a time. Several months have passed since the night I finally opened my heart. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. Our family still has busy mornings. The children still leave their shoes in the hallway. My husband still jokes that I make too much coffee on weekends. We still disagree sometimes. But there is one thing we no longer allow inside our home. Silent fear. Now, whenever something feels heavy, we talk before it grows. Whenever one of us feels ashamed, we remind each other that honesty is always welcome at our table. Looking back, I understand why I stayed silent for so long. I believed love had to be earned by appearing strong. I believed a good wife should solve every problem by herself. I believed asking for help meant failing. None of those beliefs were true. Psychologists often describe vulnerability as one of the strongest foundations of lasting relationships. When couples communicate openly, stress decreases, emotional trust increases, and small problems are far less likely to become lasting wounds. I didn't need research to convince me anymore. I had lived it. One evening, while sitting on our back porch watching the sunset over our quiet neighborhood, my husband asked me a simple question. If you could go back, he smiled gently. Would you still keep the secret? I looked toward the children playing in the backyard. I thought about the sleepless nights, the tears, the fear, the guilt. Then I shook my head. No, not for one more day. He nodded. I was hoping you'd say that. I opened my English notebook one final time. The pages were almost completely filled now. Every sentence told part of my journey. The first pages were full of fear. The last pages were filled with peace. I slowly wrote what would become my favorite English sentence. The truth gave me my family back. Then I added one more. Love grows where honesty lives. I read both aloud. Slowly, clearly, confidently. Months ago, I practiced English because I wanted better pronunciation. Today, I still practice English. But now every simple sentence reminds me of something much more important. The right words, spoken at the right time, can change a life. Sometimes learning English and healing a relationship follow the same path. You don't become fluent overnight. You improve sentence by sentence. Conversation by conversation. Day by day. Trust works exactly the same way. A single honest conversation cannot erase every mistake. But it can become the first page of a completely new chapter. Our children know nothing about every detail of this story. They don't need to. What they see now is enough. They see parents who apologize. Parents who listen. Parents who choose kindness before assumptions. Parents who laugh more often than they worry. That may be the greatest lesson we could ever give them. Today, the white envelope that once terrified me no longer stays hidden in a drawer. I keep it inside the same journal where I wrote my first English practice sentences. Not because I enjoy remembering painful days, but because it reminds me of one unforgettable truth. The biggest lie of my life wasn't the money. It wasn't the secret. It wasn't the silence. The biggest lie was believing that the people who truly love me would love me less after hearing the truth. I was completely wrong. If you're listening to my story today, perhaps you're carrying a secret of your own. Maybe it's small. Maybe it feels impossible to share. I'm not here to tell you what decision to make. But I hope my journey reminds you of this. Fear writes fast endings. Truth writes lasting beginnings. And sometimes, the bravest words you'll ever speak are also the simplest. I need to tell you something. Those 6 words changed my marriage. They changed my family. And in many ways, they changed me. That's all for today. I'll be making many more stories like this in the future. Please subscribe so you don't miss the next one.